Now, the one really key thing to understand about him is he is brutally honest.
That's going to be an interesting
Yes.
cultural dynamic here to explore, is how brutal honesty lines up with Seattle Nice or the Seattle Freeze. And people can't stand brutal honesty here in Seattle. It's like it's toxic to people.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day about what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on the show, we get to talk about some of the most interesting stories and trends in the news. John, we're back in the office. I can hear the plane overhead anyway.
Great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Coming up on this week's show, tech legend Vinod Khosla, co-founder of Sun Microsystems, one of the biggest venture capitalists in the world. He and his family are buying our Seattle Seahawks for a record $9.6 billion. So who is this guy? We dug into hours of interviews and talks to find out what kind of owner he'll be, his obsession with finding the right people, his brutal honesty. And John, at the end of one of these talks, I think I have identified the blind spot that could get him in trouble. And I'm going to share that with you.
Well, that's a good teaser.
And this week, I'm going to skip trivia, but I've got a new segment for you coming up at the end of the show. We're going to ask listeners to tell us about the coolest tech artifact or gadget or piece of technology history that you've ever found in a thrift store or a garage sale or an antique shop.
Or my basement.
Or your basement. Excavating history from your own past.
It has to be the old handheld football game that had like little dashes.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
I don't think it was Coleco, but it was.
We'll come up with it.
Yeah, okay.
Save it for the last segment.
We'll figure it out by the end of the show.
There's a reason I'm bringing this up. It relates to a really cool story that our colleague Kurt Schlosser had this week. So we'll talk about that later on. But first, John, this story is the most GeekWire story. It's perfect.
It really is. I mean, we don't really have a dog in this fight, right? But from a news standpoint, could we have asked for a better owner of the Seattle Seahawks than Vinod Khosla? Maybe Steve Ballmer would be fun, but we've kind of already done that, right? With the Clippers. And so this is an intriguing new entrant into the Seattle sports, and not really a new entrant into the tech ecosystem here, because he's played a role in the tech ecosystem here for decades.
To some extent, he has not been super prolific in terms of his investments in Seattle companies. But let's take a step back before we dive in. So who is this guy? So Vinod Khosla co-founded Sun Microsystems in his 20s. He became one of Silicon Valley's top venture capitalists. He runs Khosla Ventures, where he's backed companies like OpenAI and Square and Impossible Foods. His core philosophy is that a company becomes the people it hires, not the plan it makes. He thinks that you need to find the right people, back them, and get out of their way. And he's also famous, though, for being brutally direct and taking big swings that fail, he says, 90% of the time, which I guess that's venture capital.
Hopefully not the Seahawks, though. You're not gonna last long if you fail 90% of the time with the Seahawks.
But then the question that hit me right after that was, why? Why is this guy interested in buying the Seattle Seahawks?
I think it's a vanity play, and his son is really interested in sports, plain and simple.
It's interesting you should say that.
I mean, is it more than that?
I think that's a big part of it. And we should say, so his son, Neil, who is also an entrepreneur, is kind of a statistician. He's involved in healthcare technology. That's his startup. And the ownership group is actually led by Vinod Khosla's wife, Neeru Khosla. She's the controlling owner in the NFL memo. I thought that was interesting. She does not have a big track record in business like he does.
It seems like a technicality, right? This is the Khosla family that's buying the team, and Vinod Khosla has generated most of the wealth for that family. I don't know. Maybe it was something tied to Vinod Khosla was also an owner in the 49ers, and maybe that ownership stake was in his name. And as a result, I don't know. But it's probably some technicality like that, right?
The assumption is that they will be divesting that 3 point whatever percent.
4.9%, wasn't it?
Stake in the San Francisco 49ers, which are the NFC West division rivals of the Seahawks. And so you can see where that would cause some issues to have an ownership stake in both and may not even be allowed under the NFL rules. I do think family is a big part of this, John. I agree with you in terms of his motivations. One of the things that he said at the very end of one of the talks was that part of his criteria for the rest of his career is not only making an impact in the world and doing things that are going to have an outsized impact, but also making his 4 kids proud. So I think your theory, your hypothesis is right on the mark. This is one of his kids. I think it might be his only son, Neil, who is involved in this ownership group, clearly very interested in football. And so
what does he have to do for the other 3 kids? Jeez.
Maybe they're
he's only worth about $15 billion, and this is a almost $10 billion acquisition, right?
Now, we should say one of the unanswered questions, though, is who else is in this ownership group?
This is what's very intriguing to me. In fact, this would be another great story for us is
Yes.
to uncover who those people are. I'm sure they're going to come out over time. But we could also do some speculation on who else is coming on board. My gut says we're going to see even more of the Silicon Valley invasion and more Silicon Valley money stepping to the table here. And to me, that's an interesting part of this story because we've talked forever on the GeekWire podcast about this cross-pollination between Seattle and the San Francisco Bay Area. There's just so much money, talent, ideas. There's a reason why they call it the nerd bird between Seattle and San Francisco, because there's just so much activity between these two regions. And we've covered this forever with the arrival of all these major engineering centers of Salesforce and Google and Meta and Anduril and all these other large California companies that have a big presence here. And so it's just continuing this trend, and now it's filtering into our sports ecosystem. This is one of the reasons why we're excited about this just as a story at GeekWire, because it's continuing this trend line that we've been talking about and covering for more than a decade. I think you'll see some wealthy individuals from the Seattle area jump on board and be a part of this, but I think you're also going to see some additional heavyweights from the Bay Area that are part of this group too.
All right, so to give you a sense of who Vinod Khosla is, I think you need to hear him in his own words. So let's do that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we will be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. This week we are getting to know Vinod Khosla, the longtime Silicon Valley investor whose family is leading the group that is acquiring the Seattle Seahawks NFL franchise for a reported $9.6 billion. Vinod Khosla is a Silicon Valley person. I mean, this is somebody who has not really operated in Seattle significantly, except he has made a number of investments here.
Yeah, over the years, certainly. I mean, you have a track record that he has. He's at some point going to be investing in Seattle area companies. I wouldn't say he's prolific here, but over the years, a company called Lexion, which was acquired by DocuSign for a healthy return. I think that was a good outcome. More recently, a company called Ravenna AI, which is trying to reimagine the internal help desk support system. And then another company called Loti, which is doing things in the deep fakes arena as it relates to celebrities and athletes for that matter. So yeah, he's done a number of investments here. I don't think he's hit a home run out of a Seattle-based startup to date, but he's certainly involved. He shows up from time to time at various events. We've covered him over the years when he's been in Seattle speaking. And so I think it's interesting, again, to our points earlier in the conversation, to have this Silicon Valley tech icon now being rooted into our ecosystem in a much, I mean, what bigger way could you be rooted into the ecosystem of Seattle than owning the Seahawks, right?
So some things to know about Vinod Khosla. He schedules his time in 15-minute increments.
I love that.
He tracked his time monthly across 20 categories and set a goal of having dinner with his kids 25 times a month.
Whoa.
He insists that work-life balance is in fact possible if you're purposeful about it. He's never really worked for anybody. He's always been his own boss, his own entrepreneur, starting things on his own.
That can be good or bad.
He has an email rule where he'll spend exactly as much time answering your email as he perceives you spent writing it thoughtfully.
I wonder how that works in the age of AI.
He is not a fan of consultants, and he is not really a fan of journalists, I have to tell you.
Okay, well.
That said, thinking of those last two things, one of my thoughts was, who better to conduct the first interview with Vinod Khosla about his Seattle Seahawks purchase than the two of us, really? So what I'm going to do, John, is I'm going to package up this podcast and send it to him. I've got his email address. He actually gives it out at his talks, and send it to him and suggest that the hour that we spent talking about him on this podcast should be matched under his principle.
There we go. That's right. There you go. I love this.
Now, the one really key thing to understand about him is he is brutally honest. He said in a talk at the Stanford Graduate School of Business about 11 years ago, "Some people buy a yacht. I bought myself the freedom of brutal honesty, and it's an indulgence." And I would say if you're going to listen to one talk of all the ones I heard, this is the one to listen to. So let me play you some more clips from this talk.
I am amazed at how few people have a belief system. What do they actually believe in? Yeah, it's okay to offend you guys. 90% of you will do what's expected of you as opposed to what you want to do. When I come to an event like this, say, why am I here? Why would I even bother to take an hour of my valuable time? No, it's true. I have to have a purpose. My goal is very simple. If I can convert one of you, there's probably 400, 500 people here. If I can convert one of you to follow your belief and have the guts to follow your belief, I'll think of the hour as well spent.
So don't do what you think other people think you should do. Do what's right by you. That is one of his guiding principles.
Hearing him speak, it sounds like a true entrepreneur.
Yes, totally.
Which is interesting within the NFL system because it's not necessarily made up of rule breakers. And it's a socialistic system at the end of the day.
Yeah, right.
It's not a capitalistic system. It'll be interesting to see how a rule breaker entrepreneur fits into the larger NFL ecosystem.
Right. And when you say socialistic, it's an organization that operates in coordination with itself, even though the teams are competing. Ultimately, it's one big organization of multiple franchises. And somebody coming in looking to disrupt that.
And maybe he's not. Maybe he's just trying to own the Seahawks and do the best he can with the Seahawks. But he would have a ceiling based on what he can and can't do, which might run into some limitations that he's not used to.
Right, but that he must be aware of going into this situation.
Which gets back to, this is also just probably a fun project.
Yes.
But it is a lot of his net worth.
Yes.
That's one thing that surprised me. Now, again, we're going back to this. He's leading the effort. The $9.6 billion, is it?
Reported.
There will be other investors coming in behind that to help round out the rest of the investment group.
So we don't know exactly how much of that $9.6 billion is coming from his family, his enterprise, but you can assume it's on the order of, I don't know, half, a third. We don't know.
We don't know.
We need to figure that out. Okay. Where I get really stuck with him and where I think he's going to have problems is
I was going to ask you. I wrote this down, Todd, that you didn't forget the blind spot.
It's going to take me a minute to get there, but let's listen next to him talk about brutal honesty. This is also, again, at that Stanford Graduate School of Business talk.
And I said, the one thing I'll do is not do what others want me to do or be polite, which generally means dishonest. There's a great book by Sam Harris, who's a professor over on the other side, about lying. I recommend everybody read Sam Harris's book on lying and why we all lie too much and too often. We put this sort of slogan, I prefer brutal honesty to hypocritical politeness, on our website because it's a real disservice to people. You don't have to be offensive to be honest. When I don't like somebody, I can get offensive to, but generally you can be constructive and very honest, and I prefer that brutal honesty because it serves a purpose. The receiver can do something about it if it's a constructive criticism. If you get hypocritical politeness, you might lose a lot. I was working on a company with another major venture firm, and I didn't believe their plan would work. They had $45–50 million in the bank account, so everybody was comfortable, too comfortable in my view. I talked to the founders why it wouldn't work. What my concerns were, the other VCs agreed with me in the board meeting, said all these polite things. So 40 engineers wasted 3 or 4 years of their life because nobody was willing to tell them the honest truth about what they really thought. And I swore I would never let anybody waste their life, at least give them the best advice I had to give and tell them I may be wrong, but I'm not going to say something I don't believe in. I just won't.
This comes to the blind spot. Now, let me play you what happened at the very end of this talk, because he had talked about brutal honesty the whole time. And Stanford Graduate School of Business students stood up and asked this.
So I think your brand of swashbuckling is particularly effective if you show some vulnerability. So I'm going to be your buddy and allow you to tell us a story about a time when you got crushed by somebody's brutal honesty and what you did with that.
Great question.
So you heard the question, and I heard the question, and the audience listening to this podcast heard the question. I want you to share an experience where you were crushed by someone else's brutal honesty. In other words, have some empathy as you're giving this brutally honest advice to other people. What has it been like for you when you've been in their shoes receiving brutally honest advice from others? Share an experience along those lines, please. So he spent a minute or so talking about his failures. So you can hear how he started here.
So
everybody in the crowd loved that question.
It would take an hour to talk about all my mistakes.
I don't want to play the whole thing.
He didn't answer the question.
He didn't answer. He talked about his failures. And then at the end of him going on about his failures, the question gets restated. And then he misunderstands the question again. He pivots to talking about a time when his brutal honesty backfired on him. In other words, he was brutally honest with somebody else, and it caused him harm in terms of being turned into an outcast within their organization, not understanding at all the question. And to me, I recognize this as one example of one exchange at the end of an event, but it made me wonder about his empathy and his ability behind this swashbuckling, as this person put it, which I loved that characterization of his personality, behind this swashbuckling, to be somebody who understands and empathizes with the people around him. I don't know if there's a lot of that there.
I think there is something to dive into here. And to me, I'll go back again to a pure entrepreneur, and a pure entrepreneur who's been doing it since his 20s, as you said, who's never worked for anybody before. There are so many humbling experiences that come from working for others. He's never done that. And he's had enormous success and has created enormous wealth for him and his family. But it seems, hearing this and hearing your explanation, that he's a person who maybe has never been in those situations before, who's really kind of gotten everything he's wanted. And that doesn't always teach you the best lessons. I mean, there would be an easy way to respond to this as a venture capitalist. I'm sure there have been examples of when he was crushed because an entrepreneur told him no. And
really?
I would think so. Over the course of your life as a venture capitalist, if that's never happened to you, I don't think you're swinging enough times. I don't know. Maybe he gets into every deal he wants.
He's Vinod Khosla.
Maybe he does. And in that case, that is a vulnerability.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That stood out to me.
It really does. And I had a friend in San Francisco text me after the Vinod Khosla news broke and saw the GeekWire coverage. And his response was essentially, be careful here. It was like he had some background stuff that was like he's had some interactions where this sort of personality and a lack of empathy really came through. And, you know, there's also the dispute where he's closed off a section of California, near Half Moon Bay, some prime California beach property that was previously open to the public, and he's trying to shut it down. It's in litigation. It's a messy situation, but that has not endeared him to many in California.
In 2008, he bought a 53-acre property just south of Half Moon Bay. It included the only access road to Martin's Beach, a stretch of coastline that surfers and families had used for decades. And he locked the gate and blocked public access. And as you said, it set off a legal battle. It went to the Supreme Court in California and back. And the New York Times headline on the story that they wrote about this in 2018 was, "Every generation gets the beach villain it deserves."
Yeah, so he's not without his controversies. And speaking brutally honestly, as you know, Todd, being from Seattle, or as I'm going, this is where I'm going. The whole passive aggressive Seattle nice. People can't stand brutal honesty here in Seattle. It's like it's toxic to people. It's the same thing that happens when you have people from the East Coast come to Seattle and they're like, "Oh, geez, that person's really laying it on the line." They just can't handle it. So that's going to be an interesting cultural dynamic here to explore, is how brutal honesty lines up with Seattle nice or the Seattle freeze. And people just aren't brutally honest here.
No, they're not. For better or worse.
For better or worse. It's just part of the culture. Yeah. Vinod Khosla actually spoke to Sam Altman.
Yes.
Many years ago. Vinod is an investor in OpenAI. And his quote in that was interesting because it relates back to our football conversation.
Yes.
And he said, "Experience doesn't matter. The rate of learning matters. Pick for the best athlete, not the person who's the most established wide receiver who knows how to run one pattern." I mean, that gives you some insights into maybe the types of football players they might be drafting. And I like that. I like that. I believe that.
Do you think he'll actually get involved, though, at the level of player personnel decisions?
Maybe his son will. Sounds like his son is and they have said his son is going to have some executive role in the organization, and so through his son, perhaps.
Well, as you said, I don't think we could have asked for a better buyer of the Seattle Seahawks. I think it would have been a little
Elon Musk. That would have been interesting.
Maybe.
Actually, that would have been too over the top.
Yes. I think the Silicon Valley connection is fascinating here. I think it's way better, a much more interesting story than if it were somebody from inside the Seattle ecosystem. I think this is going to be fascinating to see how it plays out over the next years, over the next decades.
And it's a hard position to come in. The Seahawks just won the Super Bowl.
Yes.
I mean, where do you go from here? I mean, it's like you're likely going to start on a downward trajectory. Well, unless they repeat as Super Bowl champs, which it's highly unlikely.
Maybe it's the start of a dynasty. Who knows? The other question, too, is from a pure investment standpoint, and maybe this is just vanity, but as you said, whatever it is, it's a significant portion of his net worth, depending on the proportion of the $9.6 billion that he's putting in. But is he buying at the top of the market here? Yeah, people who follow the NFL would say, no, these franchise values just go up and up and up. Yeah, so did the real estate market, back in the day, until it crashed. Who knows where this will be in 10 years when his son and family decide to sell? I don't know. It's, as an investment, it's interesting as well. And I'm sure people would debate me on that. But yeah, fascinating story. And I'm glad we have a chance and a unique vantage point to cover this one. All right, coming up next, let's dive into a little bit of tech history thrift store edition. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop and John Cook. As I said, John, we're going to skip trivia this week because we've got some history to dive into. We got an email this week from a recycler, an electronics recycler, Tyler Rivers of Living Green Technology. It's a series of electronics recycling facilities in the Seattle region. And he explained that he had gotten this kind of like historical collection, an engineering archive consisting of gold-plated prototype chips, raw silicon architectures exposed under glass, experimental fiber optic cables, and other things that look like they were basically flight control systems, kind of an aerospace and potentially Boeing and NASA kind of thing. Just super interesting, all sorts of interesting tech artifacts. And he rescued it from being recycled. And Kurt wrote the story about it. I don't know exactly what this is.
None of us do.
Yeah.
It's just this weird stuff.
But super interesting, and it feels like it maybe came from a Boeing engineer.
That was what I was guessing, that there was some former Boeing engineer from the 60s, 70s cleaning out his or her garage or basement and had all this leftover machinery and computer equipment and wanted to get rid of it. And the likelihood of that in this region is high.
Yes.
There are a lot of those people hanging around the Seattle area.
Yes.
So it's not a surprise that this type of equipment would show up here.
So I will link from the show notes to Kurt's story. He's got a lot of great pictures in there that came from Tyler. And
if you have any ideas on what this stuff is, send us an email to tips@geekwire.com.
I liked this story not only for the mystery itself, but also just for the nostalgia. And I will often find myself in a thrift store, in a secondhand store, or in places like RePC, the recycled computer place down in Seattle's Soto neighborhood. And I got to tell you, John, if you ever want to hang out where the real geeks are, go to RePC. They've still got that computer museum in the back that we highlighted in our Seattle Tech Tour back in the day. But I wanted to share something that I found there just within the past couple months. I've actually got it here right on the table, John, and I'll put a picture in the show notes.
Okay.
This is Adobe PageMaker 7.0. And I found this at RePC.
How much did you buy it for?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
My daughter and her friends were at the bins.
I know the bins.
Yes, the Goodwill bins.
Yes.
I dropped them off, and they had asked me to take them down there. And so, of course, I took the opportunity to go to RePC. And just within the past few months, I covered the passing of Paul Brainerd.
Right.
The Aldus PageMaker co-founder and former CEO. And with that, really started to get into the history of Aldus in Seattle, the maker of PageMaker, and realized that it's kind of one of the untold stories of Seattle tech history. And so to some extent, I scratched that itch writing the tribute to Paul, and the reaction was huge in terms of reader interest and great memories about using Aldus PageMaker. Now, of course, Aldus sold PageMaker to Adobe. And what I have here, John, with Adobe PageMaker 7.0 is the last version of PageMaker ever made. In other words, this version, 7.0, was the last one. And in fact,
what year?
It was released in October 2001.
And you know what's interesting is the Adobe logo hasn't changed much.
That's a good point.
It's basically the same logo. Okay.
But you'll notice, John, do you see anything unique about this?
Hold it up again. Well, it's unique in that it's packaged software, and you don't see that anymore.
Never been opened.
Oh.
Never been opened, and we're not opening it right now.
Well, I am assuming this is going onto the history wall at GeekWire.
It will for a time. What I got it for actually was that experience of writing that piece connected me with a bunch of Aldus veterans, people who were there at the beginning, including one of the co-founders. And
yeah, it was Jeremy Jake was there, a very successful entrepreneur. Bill McAleer, a venture capitalist at Voyager Capital. So the DNA of Aldus goes very deep into the Seattle ecosystem.
One of the founders that I connected with is by the name of Mark Sundstrom, who was on that legendary trip that they took down to Oregon, where they realized what they could do in terms of PageMaker, creating a desktop publishing program for the masses, not just for newspapers, because they realized that newspapers...
Maybe not the best business model.
So here's where I'm headed with this. Someday in my retirement, perhaps, I'm going to write a book about Aldus.
Really?
Claude and I are.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Gosh, with all your expertise on Microsoft, that's what you're going to choose.
I think it's one of the untold stories of tech, and I think it's one that resonates with everybody, at least especially folks of our generation. The desktop publishing revolution, they coined the term. There's too many Microsoft books out there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want to do something a little different where you actually had some unique insights? So anyway, the reason I bought this, John, it's the last version of PageMaker ever made. It actually will work, if I understand correctly, on Windows XP. So if in my ample spare time, in retirement or elsewhere, I would write the
not worth your
book
time.
and paginate the book
No.
on this on Windows XP.
Don't do this.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
No,
it would be so
it would
authentic.
be so many headaches that you would be. I don't think you could do it.
Which would be part of the story.
I know it'd be very frustrating.
I think you're wrong. I think by the time they got to PageMaker 7.0 on a modern Windows, quote, modern Windows machine, I'd have to go back and do some emulation or find a Windows XP machine.
Hey.
Wouldn't that be, it would look so cool though. I mean, PageMaker had this like distinct look with the fonts and anyway, that's my plan.
Okay. Hey, we all have to have dreams.
To answer the question that you asked earlier, and the question that I know is on the mind of one of our listeners, your brother Dan, who showed up at the office this past week and gave me crap for spending $2,500 on my retrofit in my car, in my 2007 Camry of the infotainment system. Loyal listener, Dan Cook. I paid $50 for this.
Oh my gosh, really? Wow.
You can see I've blown my budget between
I can't believe you spent that much money on it.
It's unopened, John. It's unopened. This is a piece of technology history.
Okay.
All right. So here's my question for the listeners out there. Did you have more to say on that?
No, I'm just blown away. That was $50.
I probably should have haggled. I should have haggled.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get into an awkward conversation with the guy at RePC behind the counter on this one. I was just like, this is a rare piece of history. I'm going to get it. Here's my question for the listeners out there. What is the coolest piece of tech history, device, gadget, memorabilia from tech days of yore that you've ever found at an estate sale, at a recycling center, at a Goodwill, at a thrift store, at RePC, wherever you found it, whether you bought it or not, although I would love it if you actually did buy it, because that meant you cared, even if you didn't spend as much as I did inordinately. Tell us about it. Email me at todd@geekwire.com. Record a voice memo. Send an explanation in the email. Send a picture. Whatever you want to do. And I think we should talk about it next week on the show.
I love it. Send in your favorite tech historical gadget or
find. The
find.
thing that you found and you had to keep. Maybe a t-shirt, although maybe not. I'm really interested in like the thing that you saw buried on the electronics shelf at Goodwill that just meant so much to you that you had to buy it or take a picture of it and remember it.
Well, I teased mine earlier in the show, and I've since looked it up, Todd.
Yes.
And of course, we were talking a lot about American football on this episode, and the name of the device, I was actually right. It was called, but I didn't know the name of it. And we spoke about my brother Dan. My brother Dan and I played this handheld device all the time, and it was by Coleco, 1978 release. It was called Electronic Quarterback.
Wow.
A small, and you
Yes.
might recognize it. I have the photo right here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
all it was little dashes. That's all it was. And you maneuvered little dashes, and you could tell who had the ball. And you tried to get the little dash into the end zone. And we played this for hours and hours and hours. This little, tiny little handheld device.
I had something similar to that, but baseball, where it pitched to you straight down the middle and you would have to time the button press to hit. And depending on exactly when you pressed it, but it was very similar in style and genre and era to that. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It could be super addictive, especially when we didn't know any better.
Yeah. That was the only video game you had. Yes. Okay, so send in your favorites.
Yes.
Your
Don't
favorite
actually
finds.
send the devices.
No, well, we could add them to the history wall. We've had people drop stuff off randomly here.
Send us a picture.
Yeah.
Send us an email.
I like the voice memo, and then we can
tell us the
include them in the
story.
podcast.
If you so choose, do a voice memo. Yes. We'll do it either next week or the week after, and we'll do it on a future episode. I don't know if it'll be next week. We might have to take a little time to gather everything and pull it together. But yeah, it's so much fun, and it really gives you an interesting perspective on tech and an appreciation for what we have today, and frankly, an appreciation for what we had back then. So I think it's really cool to delve into this world. And I will link from the show notes to the story that our colleague Kurt Schlosser wrote about this trove of aerospace artifacts. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate all of you for subscribing. If you like the show, please give us a rating and a review in your favorite podcast app. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop.
And I'm John Cook.
We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.